Good afternoon and welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier. Let's take cognizance of the most important event that has happened in the financial markets for quite a while. And that happened yesterday. The Federal Reserve cut 25 basis points as expected and have announced they're going to end their balance sheet drawdown on August 1st. 15th of July, and actually in a series of articles prior to that, I said, if I were back at that desk that I once occupied at Credit Suisse, First Boston, I would be limit short the Eurodollar market as from Monday. That was in July 15th. And you can see the response that I was looking for. US 2-year Treasury yield now up 12 basis points since the Federal Reserve announcement of a quarter-point rate cut. In that July article where I said a US rate cut in 3 weeks is a racing certainty, I said the markets were characterized as bond vigilantes, and in an extraordinary volte-face, the bond vigilantes have morphed into pussycats. Now, it was the press conference subsequent to that announcement which caught the market entirely off guard. Dollar index sharply higher, 98.844 last time I checked. This is a chart from Santiago AU Fund. As I said at the end of last year, I said the direction of the dollar is therefore pivotal, and that at that point I was in a minority, but I expected the dollar to strengthen about 10% through 2019. This is a chart from T Commodity of the dollar index. In that article at the end of December last year, I said folks are keenly looking for chinks in the US economy. And I said if the US economy slows, I can guarantee you the rest of the world will slow further. 3rd of June, I was speaking about bond yields in tilt mode, and I was saying markets and prices exhibit patterns of correlation. And essentially, my perspective is that this correlation has exerted a pull effect, lower yields in Europe, lower yields in Japan, on US yields, and therefore the recessionary signaling inverted yield curve should be discounted. 24th of June, I was talking about it being a Wizard of Oz world, and this was when the reverie in the mind of the markets was at its strongest, at its most intense. I said the Wizard of Oz is a film made in 1939 and widely considered to be one of the greatest films in cinema history. Eventually it is revealed that Oz is actually none of these things, but rather an ordinary con man in Omaha, Nebraska, who has been using elaborate magic tricks and props to make himself seem great and powerful. I said, we're in nosebleed territory. This is voodoo economics. And just because we have not reached the point when the curtain was lifted in The Wizard of Oz, and maybe Powell yesterday kind of lifted it. And then look at this from the bond freak. This is the world, the Wizard of Oz world I'm talking about, as expressed in bond yields. Home thoughts went back to Jack Kerouac. There was nowhere to go but everywhere. So just keep on rolling under the stars. What's your road, man? Holy Boy Road, Madman Road, Rainbow Road, Guppy Road, any road. It's an anywhere road for anybody, anyhow, where, body, how. Jack Kerouac. This is a photograph by Robert Frank, a long shot of Night Road playing on the road, arrowing forlorn into immensities and flat of impossible to believe America in New Mexico under the prisoner's moon. Happiness consists in realizing it is all a great, strange dream. The road is life, And finally, the silence was an intense roar. Jorge Luis Borges, I was reading his poem, Adam Cast Forth. Was there a garden, or was the garden a dream? Amid the fleeting night, I have slowed myself and queried, almost for consolation, if the bygone period over which this Adam, wretched now, once reigned supreme, might not have just been a magical illusion of that God I dreamed. Already it's imprecise, in my memory the clear paradise, but I know it exists in flower and profusion. Although not for me, my punishment for life is the stubborn earth with the incestuous strife of Cains and Abels and their brood. I await no pardon. Yet it's much to have loved, to have known true joy, to have had, if only for just one day, the experience of touching the living garden. And then Shinto, when sorrow lays us low, for a second we are saved by humble windfalls of the mindfulness or memory, the taste of a fruit, the taste of water, that face given back to us by a dream, the first jasmine of November, the endless yearning of the compass, a book we thought was lost, the throb of a hexameter, the slight key that opens a house to us, the smell of a library or of sandalwood, the former name of a street, the colours of a map, an unforeseen etymology, the smoothness of a filed fingernail, the date we were looking for, the 12 dark bell strokes tolling as we count, a sudden physical pain. 8 million Shinto deities travel secretly through the earth. Those modest gods touch us, and move on. Political reflections, the New York Fire Commissioners are calling for a new investigation into the 9/11 attacks, citing overwhelming evidence of explosives. And it's interesting how this prima facie fact, because if you've watched a lot of these documentaries, you'll note there's an implosion in a couple of them, has been suppressed all these years. It's quite remarkable. What President Trump is trying to do is to protect African American and Hispanic workers. This is great, BBC World. And it takes me back to an article I wrote on the 22nd of July, the Showdown, when I was referencing the 4, he called them horsemen of the apocalypse. I thought he was playing on The Wizard of Oz and the Wicked Witch of the West, but essentially it's game over. America's foreign policy establishment is at war with itself over the shape of the country's approach toward a steadily rising China. For now, it is only an epistolary war, says Howard French. As the debate deepens, its outcome will go far toward deciding how the United States responds to its most serious global rival for economic and geopolitical power for decades ahead. The first, which appeared in early July in the Washington Post, takes on the Trump administration for driving a downward spiral in relations with China. The second, written in direct response to the first and signed by a number of former defense and diplomatic officials as well as scholars. In it, the authors eschew all nuance and describe China as a virulent and increasing threat to human freedoms, which they blame on what they call misrule by the Chinese Communist Party. Basically, I think it's a collision course, as I've said before. And from there I go to Thomas Pynchon. Don't forget that the real business of war is buying and selling. The murdering and violence are self-policing and can be entrusted to non-professionals. The mass nature of wartime death is useful in many ways. It serves as spectacle, as diversion from the real movements of the war. It provides raw material to be recorded into history so that children may be taught history as sequences of violence, battle after battle, and be more prepared for the adult world. Best of all, mass deaths, a stimulus to just ordinary folks, little fellows, to try grab a piece of that pie while they're still here to gobble it up. The true war is a celebration of markets. Let's move on. From Trump's point of view, standing with Britain in such an economic Cold War would be a way of weaponizing the post-Brexit situation to damage or destroy the EU, to which he has been always opposed. Let's go to the currency markets. Eurodollar 110.44, quite a steep drop yesterday. Dollar index 98.823. Dollar yen 109.08. Swiss franc 0.9959, the pound 121.18. Very bearish, the pound now, particularly if Boris follows through. The Australian dollar 0.6848, India rupee 69.088, South Korean won 11.8773, the Rial 381.28, emerging market currencies moving out, Egyptian pound 16.5525 and the Rand 14.34. Eurodollar, this is a chart from T Commodity. The euro looks precariously placed to me. Credit Suisse markets operations built on momentum from the start of the year and posted a 7% increase in bond and rates trading revenue. A few weeks back, I was writing about the enigmatic and mercurial fugitive and Bitcoin evangelist John McAfee, who always seems to pop up in my feed like an acid trip whenever Bitcoin is doing its parabola imitation. And he pops up now all the time. And the two links to videos he's put out: I'm an escaped slave with a loud voice. All of the world's slave masters are looking for me. I will not be found. I will continue to speak, but will you listen? Will you listen? You think you cannot escape your slavery because, unlike me, you're not rich and powerful. Let me clue you in. I am broke and powerless, but I am still free. Commodity markets, gold, where I'm expecting a deeper setback, is at 14.0570. Crude oil, $57.80. That's on the downside as well. And this is a great chart from Paul Wallace of cobalt, the rise and now the fall. May, I was writing about Iran and I said this level of financial and coercive sanction warfare is simply unprecedented. And I came across an article talking about the sanctions. And in that article, the writer saying, I suspect the consequences for the Iranian economy of the current sanction regime will be greater than the previous episode. And this is the point that Trump has been a big proponent of coercive financial and sanction warfare. And its expression vis-a-vis Iran is its apogee, in my opinion. Very interesting article in the Financial Times by Thomas Wilson about why Ebola cannot be tamed in the Congo. 7 grave diggers dressed in medical smocks, surgical gloves and plastic boots lifted the coffin from the back of a truck and began to pick their way through more than 200 fresh burial mounds whose simple wooden crosses cast long shadows. 1,803 people killed in the Ebola outbreak since the first cases were confirmed near Beni exactly a year ago. May, the 10th month, was the deadliest so far, and a further 349 cases were confirmed in July. For experts such as Peter Piot, this new approach could help turn the tide by allowing a vaccination program in areas where the virus has not yet been detected. This would create a curtain of immunized people around the epidemic providing a window to bring it under control. It is clear that the current strategy has not worked. There is an immediate need for a reset. I wrote about Ebola before. It's about its escape velocity. Viruses exhibit non-linear and exponential characteristics. When Clement Mwamba went to Beijing last year, he had two main tasks. The Prime Minister of the Republic of Congo needed to find out exactly how much his country owed to China, a number the struggling oil-rich Central African nation had until then not been able to provide the IMF to qualify for a bailout. He also needed to convince Beijing to restructure its debt to ensure sustainability. IMF had put talks for further loans on hold until Mwamba's administration could say exactly how much it had to repay to its external creditors, including China and oil multinationals such as Glencore and Trafigura. They've restructured their borrowings with China, which holds about $2.5 billion, extending the repayment period by an additional 15 years. A number of other African countries struggling to service their loans from Beijing have also pursued concessions. Ethiopia's had part of its Chinese debt written off and terms relaxed for the $3.3 billion loan it took to build its railway, while Zambia is seeking similar adjustments for its borrowings used to build airports and highways. At the time, many African leaders were under fire to liberalize their economies. China's approach was to promise not to meddle in individual countries' internal affairs and assure African countries that they could get billions in exchange for future delivery of minerals through resource-backed deals. China promised affordable loans for African countries to build roads, bridges, highways, airports, power dams. But this article is asking, is Kenya's Chinese-built railway a massive white elephant? Many deals was built on weak financial, technical and environmental conditions. Chinese state firms conducting the technical feasibility, environmental impact assessment and financial viability studies for free for projects that they would also build. For example, in Kenya, the China Road and Bridge Corporation conducted a free feasibility study that was used in the construction of the railway. The same company was handed the contract to implement the project and is operating both the passenger and cargo train service for a fee. According to data compiled by the China-Africa Research Initiative, Beijing has advanced loans worth $143 billion to Africa since 2000. Albert Hotzi, an international relations expert at the University of Helsinki in Finland, said Addis-Djibouti Railway, Mombasa-Nairobi Railway were good examples of huge projects that were financed by easy borrowing terms from China, but were not sustainable, and that had in turn forced the African partners to seek further Chinese help. The biggest concern is that several African countries will be left with huge debts and grandiose infrastructure that they cannot maintain and run profitably. I liken it to borrowing money to buy a Tesla when you don't have adequate access to electricity. In fact, China is becoming more careful about its lending because it is concerned it has made too much credit available to some African countries. 29th of July, I said the main creditor is not being persuaded to pony up more cash. The actual signal was emitted at FOCAC last year, but policymakers' antennae was scrambled and the message did not get through. The message only got through at the third time of asking, in fact. It's a highly interesting situation. I think China is not interested in increasing the credit book at all. We are sitting in a vehicle whose wheels have fallen off. Derek Matsiak, a senior researcher at a South African think tank at the Institute of Security Studies. Jobs are being lost, exports are being lost, government's caught between a rock and a hard place. It's a very difficult situation. There is no short-term way out. 29th of July again, I said there is a straw and camel's back moment, but predicting that moment is always a fool's errand. At a more granular level, Zimbabwe is a laboratory experiment with inflation last clocking 176%. There is a straw and camel's back moment, but predicting that moment is always a fool's errand. South African all-share up 7.68% year-to-date. Dollar rand softening up now, 14.36. Egyptian pound, let's see how that behaves. 16.58 last. Egyptian EGX 30 up 2.74% this year. Nigeria all-share down 11.81% this year. Ghana Stock Exchange down 6.11% this year. Kenya, I'm particularly keen to work closely with the team to take M-Pesa beyond Kenya, Michael Joseph. He also said he'd work on the data business to attain a better balance between consumption and revenue growth. 6th of May, I said M-Pesa is the jewel in Safaricom's crown. Regarding the data business, Joseph wants to attain a better balance between consumption and revenue growth. And last full year, they tilted data prices lower in order to turbo boost and juice consumption. So he's referring to that. Kenya shilling looks like they've intervened again, bringing it to 103.85. Nairobi all share up 5.57% year to date. NSE 20 down 7.27% year to date. Thank you for stopping by.